Hello to everyone that's logged on for this evening's webinar. We're going to get started in 5 minutes at the top of the hour. Hi, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar, Developing Emotional Intelligence for Stronger Relationships. As always, I love to start out with giving a huge shout out to Justin Gray and the entire team at 99 The Unagency for bringing me in to share valuable information with all of you, the wonderful, talented people in the entertainment industry, regardless of what you're doing. You're a member of 99, and 99 is bringing you some developmental tools and trainings, workshops, so all of you can do better and be better in your careers. I wish everybody extremely well in what they're doing. My goal is to always leave you with some simple and actionable skills that are not only good for the entertainment industry or for work life. The skills that I teach are beneficial universally, professionally, personally, and I'm happy to bring all of those to you. So I'm glad to be here. And once again, thanks to 99 The Unagency. All right. For those of you that may have been in rooms with me before or been to my webinars, been to my website, anything like that, thank you for coming back. For those of you that are new, maybe this is your first time being in one of my programs, welcome. I'm glad to have you. My name is Rob Hinds, and the name of my company is Raise Your Lid Consulting. And I help people with human connection skills of all types. And I do that through three types of services. First, I do it through coaching and consulting services, privately or in small groups. Then I do it for developmental training programs, which what I do for 99 is what I call my micro learning series. So in a short period of time, I give you some information and you leave with some simple actionable skills. However, a big part of what I do for my work is larger training programs for groups, organizations, businesses, and cultures to where we really dig deeper on a lot of the subjects that I review with all of you on in 99. The last thing that I do is public speaking events. So whether it's things like inspirational or educational, I get out in the public and I serve them by teaching them these skills, much like I'm doing with you this evening. Glad to be here. And at the end of the presentation, I'll make sure I share all of my contact information. If you would like to follow me on my social channels, send me a DM, give me your thoughts and opinions on the programs that I put out there. I'm glad to hear from anybody. Okay, as far as this and all the other programs that I do for 99, I'm going to go through the entire presentation. And then at the very end, I've left time to answer everybody's questions. So what I'll ask you to do is put your questions into the Q&A or the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them. To make things more efficient and beneficial for everybody, make sure that your questions are a couple things. First and foremost, your questions apply to the information we're going through this evening. I know I do a lot of different programs for 99, and sometimes people ask a question about a previous program, and I want to make sure that everybody is on board with the information this evening. So keep it dialed into emotional intelligence. And there's no need to share a long story or a background or anything like that. Just very simply, very directly ask your question, and I'll give you the best response I possibly can. Put all things into the Q&A and chat, and I'll make sure they get answered or responded to at the end of the presentation. Okay, for this evening, here's what we're looking to do. We're looking to really define emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is abbreviated normally one of two ways: EQ, emotional quotient, or EI, emotional intelligence. For the majority of this program, I'm going to refer to it as EQ. And that way, once I say those things, everybody will understand I'm talking about emotional intelligence or emotional quotient throughout the program. So we're going to define what it is. We're also going to go through some EQ skills, what it actually means and how EQ is broken down. And then we're going to talk about indications of people that have a high level of emotional intelligence and people who have a low level of emotional intelligence. Those are the things we're going to be going through this evening. Okay, this is actually a great quote that I like to start out this program with especially. This is from Dr. Brene Brown. Human emotions and experiences are layers of biology, biography, behavior, and backstory. In other words, there are a lot of different components that come into play when we're looking at our emotional intelligence and recognizing the emotional intelligence within others. And here's how it works. So, when it comes to who we are as people as a whole, the main three components around it is our IQ or intelligence quotient. Most people know IQ as, how book smart are you? How well can you learn and retain information? That's what we're talking about when we talk about IQ. So IQ is a lot about how we think. Then we get to EQ, emotional intelligence, which is what we're going over tonight. When we talk about EQ in the combination of who we are as people, we're talking about how we act, how we respond, how we feel in certain situations, how we feel with certain people, and then how we feel with certain people in certain situations. Then the third main component of this is our personality. And our personality is the way we appear. There's a program that I do called Presentation of Self. It's basically what vibe do you put out there and how do you put it out there. That's our personality. So between our IQ, our EQ, and our personality, this is what essentially makes us up as a whole person. So how we think, how we act is really who we are. All of us who have been to whatever level of schooling or formal education, IQ always seems to be very important. It's learn the information, memorize the information, do well on the test, get good grades, get diplomas, degrees, that sort of thing. So in school, success is really judged about 75% on IQ and 25% or even less with emotional intelligence. Here's the thing. Once we part from school and we get out there in the world and we start to work, we start to join groups, clubs, teams, that sort of thing. What you'll notice, especially in your career, those numbers are actually going to reverse. Now, in your career, 75% of EQ leads to success, and 25% or so of IQ leads to success. And here's a different way and another way to break this down. When we look at some of the differences between IQ and EQ out there in the world, so to speak, IQ helps you get in the door. So it helps you get the interview, might help you get the job, might help you qualify for clubs or anything like that. When you have EQ or emotional intelligence, these are the things that actually help you succeed at your job. Can you work with people? Can you talk appropriately? Can you adjust yourself when you're feeling mad, sad, angry, any of those things? How do you handle yourself both in one-on-one and group situations? IQ is the measure of ability to learn and understand. EQ is the measure of the ability to use your emotions and logical skills. So sometimes people who are very book smart and have those qualities of learning and remembering information, putting them to use is when you start to use your emotional intelligence skills. Normally, people with a high level of IQ try to convince people of doing things or influencing people by using facts or data or history or that type of information. People with a high level of emotional intelligence try to convince or influence people by reasoning, by talking it out, by communicating well. When you're a person who lives in high IQ, you're at the mercy of your emotions because all you've done is learn at this point. you've learned, you've retained information. When you have a level of EQ, now you're starting to understand and manage your emotions and use them, well, hopefully for the greater good. IQ, normally we call those people book smart. EQ, sometimes we call those people heart smart or people smart. IQ gets you through school, EQ gets you through life. Now, not to say that a combination of both aren't phenomenal. They absolutely are. If you have a high level of IQ and a high level of EQ, chances are you have the ability to be successful or do what you want to do the way you want to do it in a very positive way. If you have one over the other, there may be an imbalance there. However, normally, as far as schooling, formal education, IQ gets you through. EQ really helps you get through the rest of life. All right, now we're going to fully define what emotional intelligence is. This is the ability to not only recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions. This second part normally gets left off. It's also the ability to recognize and understand the emotions of others. That's where we really start to build the skill of emotional intelligence. However, it all starts with us internally. Do we recognize our own emotions? And how do those emotions come out of us? Until we can do that on a mid to high level, it's a lot more difficult, not impossible, but it's a lot more difficult to recognize and understand the emotions of others. Now, there are some people that completely push their emotions aside and all they do is focus on others. That's not a healthy level of emotional intelligence. If you're bearing your own emotions and only pointing at others and saying, "Oh, I recognize this in this person," or "I see that in that person," but you're not helping yourself by recognizing your own emotions and how they come out of you. It may seem like a good parlor trick to recognize others. However, it to be really truly strong in emotional intelligence, it starts with you. And here's how it looks. So when we look at this chart, we're going to start with the left side. We're going to start with self. When we start with self, there's two levels here. There's self-awareness and self-management. Self-awareness is the recognition. This is basically who you are or who I am if we're looking at it at ourselves. It's the awareness around it, the ability to recognize and understand your moods, your emotions, the things that drive you, the things that diminish from you, um, and how that might affect yourself. Then we get into self management, which is regulation. With regulation, it's what you do, it's how you act. So self management is the ability to control or redirect impulses, moods, that sort of thing. It's basically if you're aware of how you're feeling, if that feeling happens to be anger or sadness, and the things that come out of you really are impulsive, and your anger may come out as screaming at somebody, your sadness may come out as crying. Not that these things are entirely bad. However, people who have low self-regulation or self-management skills have a really hard time moving into this next section. So we talked about the self-awareness, recognition, self-management, regulation. Now, if you move to the right side of this chart, now we're going to talk about the social pieces of emotional intelligence. We're aware of our own emotions. We regulate our own emotions. Now, social awareness is, again, back to recognition, and it's the ability to recognize the emotions in others. Can you tell when somebody's having a bad day? Can you tell when somebody may need to talk or tell you something? Can you tell when somebody maybe wants to be left alone? So, Are you aware of the emotions in others? That's the recognition part of social awareness. Then if we move down to the bottom right quadrant, we're talking about social skills, and this is regulation. Now, this is how we start to build trust with people, build rapport with people, actually cultivating social skills so we can develop really good relationships. Going back to the beginning, if we're not self-aware, if we're not aware of our own emotions, it's really hard for us to self-regulate of how those emotions come out of us, which makes it more difficult to recognize the true feelings in others and be empathetic, which in turn may not equate to the greatest relationships or social skills. So when we look at that left column, it's how we manage ourselves. When we look at the right column, the social piece, it's how we handle relationships. This is probably one of the better visuals and ways to explain the four quadrants of emotional intelligence. Okay. Just to break this down, people with high EQ notice how they feel, they understand what triggers their reactions and why. That's the self-awareness piece. They also constructively manage their words, their actions in response, which is self-management or self-regulation. When we get to the social part of it, they notice and empathize with how other people are feeling. That's the social awareness piece. Now, it's empathizing and understanding how other people feel, even if you don't agree with it. This isn't about agreement or disagreement. This is about awareness, being aware that somebody's feeling a certain way and recognizing that and having empathy or the ability to have an understanding of them. Then it's taking the time to build, deepen, or repair relationships in your social networks. This is relationship management. And once we start to cultivate skills, social skills around relationship management, it turns emotional intelligence into now what we call social intelligence. And actually, that was the last presentation that I did for 9-9. You may want to look it up on their YouTube channel. I'm sure the recording is up. Social intelligence is that ability. Social intelligence is now cultivating relationships with a high level of emotional intelligence skills. I want you to think of it this way. EQ is a competence. In other words, it's a skill. It's not something you're born with or born without. It's not something that in a fixed mindset you either have or don't have. All of us have the ability to develop our level of EQ or emotional intelligence. It can increase or it can decrease. There may be moments where, with certain people or in certain situations, you may have a high level of emotional intelligence. There may be certain people or certain situations or certain environments where you have a very low level. So, this is something that can vary. However, because it's a competence or a skill, it's something you can continue to work on, work through, build, and grow great consistency with a high level of emotional intelligence. So it's very important for everybody to know these are abilities that can be built and grown regardless of who you are. We talked about IQ or intelligence earlier. If you're high intelligence or low intelligence, emotional intelligence is on the table for you. It doesn't matter. Regardless of where you live, who's in your social circles, regardless of any of that, emotional intelligence is always up to you. You have the ability to increase it, or you could let it decrease and diminish, which would affect relationships. All right. Now I'm going to share some of the skills around EQ. When it comes to self-awareness, The ability to accurately perceive your emotions in the moment and understand what you normally have done in the past in those situations. So one of the skills around self-awareness is taking that moment, realizing where you're at emotionally, labeling it, and then understanding that what you do from there is completely up to you. If you didn't have the skill of self-awareness, this is where you find, and I'm sure all of you in the room could attest to, at some point, you know an impulsive person. They can't control their temper, they can't control their sadness, they can't control themselves in any realm. And it's consistent. That would be somebody that would have very little to no self-awareness. When you grow the skill of self-awareness and your ability to accurately perceive your emotions in the moment, now you start to build EQ skill. When it comes to self-management or self-regulation, now you're going to use your awareness of your emotions and you're going to regulate how those emotions come out of you. If you happen to feel sadness, maybe you decide not to cry or be openly upset in the moment. Maybe you decide to take a deep breath. So you cultivate a skill that can help you regulate that emotion. Or if somebody sets you off or there's something that doesn't set well with you and you want to spout off and be angry and yell and scream, again, you would take that moment and find an exercise to build the skill of self-management so you don't come off as impulsive, unprofessional, uncaring. So, self-regulation, perceiving your own emotions, building that skill, taking a moment to recognize, and then self-management or self-regulation, now deciding what you're going to do in that moment with those emotions. When we talk about the skill around social awareness is a lot about paying attention. It could be about being a better listener. It could be about being more observant. It could be about being in the moment with people. Um, when we talk about things like social awareness, now we're not putting ourselves aside, but we're actually starting to focus on other people. So the skills around that might be silence. It might be just open your eyes, be aware of your surroundings, who's around you, what are the moods of the people, reading the room. Those are all good social awareness skills. And the other part of social awareness is having empathy, the ability to be there for somebody, to understand, even if you don't agree. Again, this isn't about agreement, this isn't about conflict yet or anything like that. It's simply about having an understanding for where they're at. Even if you don't like it, you don't agree with it, it's confusing to you, you get that this person may not be having the best day, or you're just understanding of it. That's the skills around social awareness. When it comes to skills of relationship management, and this again, this is in my social intelligence program where I break those skills down completely on their own separately. But just to break this down a little bit this evening for emotional intelligence, it's now using your self-awareness, your self-regulation, your ability to hear, see, respect, understand others. Now what you do is you start using all of those skills to build strong rapport with people, to build trust, which eventually builds relationships. So, relationship management, it's not impossible. However, it's really hard to do if your self awareness, self management, and social awareness are at a very low level. Those are the main skills to cultivate a higher level of EQ or emotional intelligence. All right. I talked about earlier, especially when it came to the self-regulation and the self-awareness piece. Normally, people say, okay, well, I recognize the emotions in me. I just happen to completely react at the time. This is actually not only a good visual, but it's a good starting point for you to start to take your self-awareness once you build that skill and that level. Now you could start to build your skill and level of self-regulation or self-management. And here's normally how it works. Something happens, and we'll call it the event. Somebody either calls you a name, upsets you, says your work isn't good enough, offends you in some way, or even on the positive side, maybe they give you a compliment and you're not comfortable taking compliments, something like that. So we call that an event. Something happens. Now, one of the things we can't control is the immediate emotion that comes to us. So basically, the event happens and you're going to feel some way, somehow. Those are the two things that are out of your control. The event is out of your control and your initial emotion. Now, this is where we start to apply emotional intelligence to come to a better response or a better feeling around the event and the emotion. The event happens. Let's say somebody calls you a name. The emotion is you get really hurt or really angry. Now, if your self awareness is there, that's a great first step. Now you've noticed, okay, they really upset me here. They really hurt me. They made me angry. Here's where you start to build your level of emotional intelligence. If the event happens, the emotion happens, and then you respond right away, that's normally where low levels of emotional intelligence come to play. And we'll use the example I've been giving. Somebody called you a name, it hurt you, it made you angry, and you scream back at them or you call them a name back. That's event, emotion, and response. The two things we could put in the middle of emotion and response are awareness. The event happened, they called me a name. The emotion, I'm angry or hurt. Okay, now I'm aware that I'm angry or hurt. I'm going to take a second and then I'm going to respond. I'm going to self-soothe or calm myself down just for a moment. Now the moment could be a few seconds or it could take more time. If you notice something happens, the response time is going to depend on how quickly you want to respond. Sometimes the emotion is, you know what? I need 10 minutes. I need the rest of the day. I'll talk to you about this tomorrow. I'll get back to you next week. So the response time could be very, very flexible. However, if you're aware and you use response time, chances are your response will not only be better for all parties involved, but especially yourself. When an event happens, you have an emotion and you respond right away. This is where people get caught up and they say, you know what? The way I said it wasn't the way I was thinking about it, or I shouldn't have said that, or I didn't mean it that way. That's what happens when we go right from emotion to response. When we go from emotion to awareness to response time to response, it gives you that, even if it's a brief moment to a long moment, to really think about how you want to respond in those situations. So that's what we call the space between emotion and response. Okay, now we're going to start to look at some what I call indicators of high levels of emotional intelligence and indicators of low levels of emotional intelligence. Now, I do want to caution everybody in the room. If you're somebody that truly looks in the mirror and you're honest with yourself, you may see some of the indications of high emotional intelligence and say, yes, you know what? That's me. I do that. I handle that very well. If you're really honest with yourself, when we look at the levels of low emotional intelligence, you might also say, yes, that's me. That's an area where I could really take the opportunity to grow and learn and do better and be better. So high and low emotional intelligence levels, they exist in all of us. All of us have handled things really well. All of us have handled things really poorly, and then everything in between. None of us are exempt from any of this. Now, for people who like to pat themselves on the back, of course, they'll spend more time on the higher end of emotional intelligence. Those people who either really want to do the work to get better, be better, or the people that like to put themselves down, they'll lean more into the low levels of emotional intelligence. My recommendation for all of you is take them for what they are and build on your strengths and either improve, diminish, or eliminate the places where you really need growth. Okay, we're going to start with indications of people with high emotional intelligence. These are the people that are really, really good at not only recognizing their emotions, but labeling them and then taking that self-regulation piece and doing their best not to let the emotions get the best of them when the emotions come out. So the ability to label emotions is a great indication of somebody with high EQ. People who are more curious about people versus being judgmental of people. People who are more curious tend to have higher levels of emotional intelligence. People who are judgmental or blame or point the finger, maybe people who have victim mentality, they would lean more toward low EQ, which we'll talk in a minute. But people who are really curious, they want to understand, they want to learn, they want to grow. That's a great indication of someone with high EQ. People with high levels of EQ are very aware and they're very honest about their strengths and their weaknesses or their deficiencies, or as I call them, areas of growth opportunity. They're very aware of that. However, they're not arrogant with their strengths and they're also not self demeaning with their weaknesses. They have a nice, healthy harmony between where they know their abilities are and where they know their abilities are not. Normally, people with high levels of EQ are a good judge of character, and the reason is they're observant. They pay attention to people. On the other side of it, people who are really self-absorbed and it's all about them all the time, it's a lot harder for them to have high EQ because they're always paying attention or worried about themselves and they really don't pay attention to others. People with high EQ, they let go of mistakes. Now, don't confuse this with ignoring mistakes or bypassing mistakes. They definitely recognize and understand the mistakes they made. However, they're willing to fix them and move past them. They don't ruminate. They don't feel like, it's constantly beating them down or weighing them down. They actually look at their mistakes as an opportunity for growth. They embrace change. So, people with high levels of emotional intelligence, our brains are designed for us not to change. Our brains want to keep us exactly where we're at because the brain is designed to protect us, even if it's not in our own best interest. People with high levels of emotional intelligence, they embrace change. They look at things from a wider perspective. They look at things as an opportunity to learn. Now, it may be something that they end up not agreeing with or not doing. They're just open to the possibility of it. People with high EQ are normally assertive. I'm not talking about aggressive, and I'm not talking about passive aggressive or passive. I'm talking about a solid harmony of being assertive. They're okay with standing up for themselves, standing up for others without getting out of hand, without blaming or shaming, and they're willing to speak up when they need to speak up. They're also willing to be quiet when they don't have anything to add. They're very assertive in a very healthy way. People with high levels of emotional intelligence normally, to some extent, have strong or very consistent boundaries. Boundaries is a big thing. In fact, One of my events coming up, I believe it's actually, yeah, it's my next event next week on the 9th. I'm actually talking about the components to build healthy boundaries. So people with high levels of emotional intelligence, they normally have pretty strong and pretty consistent boundaries. That's the indications of people with high EQ or emotional intelligence. Now, I said earlier in the presentation, and I mean it, our levels can go up and down. It depends on the day, it depends on the situation, it depends on the people. Some days our mood is what it is. The goal is for those extremes not to be consistent. And, especially the younger when we're children, the younger the children are, the less control they have over their moods, their emotions. They haven't learned the skills yet. Then when we get into adulthood, many people in adulthood still have those same challenges. And I'm sure there are many of you in the room with me tonight that could either point out to yourself if you're honest, or point out others that they're really having a hard time with this emotional intelligence thing. So now we get to the indicators of low EQ or emotional intelligence. And this actually breaks up into two categories. There's the self, which is you, and then there's others. So indicators of low emotional intelligence with yourself, these are the people that are easily stressed. A lot of things trigger them. They're very impulsive, which is that self-regulation piece. They're not openly and outwardly handling their emotions very well. These are also people that feel misunderstood. Because people with low emotional intelligence a lot of times tend to have victim mentality, they're always feeling like they're not heard, they're not seen, they're misunderstood, and they take that to a little bit of an extreme, which is why it qualifies for low emotional intelligence. Then when it comes to others, this is where blaming, shaming, um, people that get easily offended, people that hold grudges, that can't let things go or let things slide or decide when to diminish or eliminate a relationship or when to do even more work to build that relationship. The people, when others act a certain way, people with low levels of emotional intelligence, they make assumptions. I hear all the time, oh, I think my boss hates me. That's why I haven't gotten a promotion. And I say, okay, did your boss actually tell you they hated you? No, well, I just kind of feel that. Well, you may want to ask them, you know, making assumptions. There used to be an old saying that says, making assumptions makes an ass out of you and me because it's not the truth. And we don't know what the truth is if we're just assuming things. So people that make assumptions normally qualify in the low EQ territory. These are also the people with low EQ have relationship struggles. You may have a friend or a colleague that you notice they have all kinds of relationship problems all the time in every realm of their life. Chances are they're falling into the low emotional intelligence range. And then the last piece I'm going to talk about, the another indicator is people who really have poor listening skills. It could either be because they're self-absorbed. Now, when we talk about blaming, a lot of people will blame things that they could use as an excuse. Well, I'm not a good listener because I'm ADHD or I have anxiety or I have this or I have that. You could choose to be a good listener regardless of anything. Now, there may be some things that might hold people back from building that skill quicker. However, poor active listening skills is a huge indicator of low emotional intelligence. When we talk about our emotions, We'll go back to self-awareness, self-regulation. In the past, there are generations that believe that you need to bury your emotions. Actually, quite often, men were taught to bury their emotions, not to show it. Strength isn't refraining from showing your emotions. It's actually an ability to regulate them. It's not that your emotions need to come flooding out of you at all times. That's where self-management and self-regulation come into play. It's how do you regulate those emotions to be appropriate in the moment, in the situation, with the certain person. That's where true strength comes. When you build levels of emotional intelligence, that's true strength. It's not hiding or running from your emotions or judging the emotions of others. That's really low level stuff. It's when you can regulate them where the strength comes. Here's a good thing to ask yourself, either in times of stress or just consistently or regularly. What is your level of grace under pressure? And maybe make a checklist. How are you in high stressful moments? And based on the skills you learned tonight and the things you learned tonight, what could you do about it? How are you in uncomfortable situations? When your days are really hectic, is there a big difference in your level of emotional intelligence on hectic days versus days that are going really smoothly? How do we harmonize that out? How are you when things don't go as planned? Are you good at understanding how others feel? Once again, not agreeing with how they feel, just having an understanding of how they feel and showing some empathy. Now, there are a million different tips. We hear about self-care all the time. There's breathing exercises, yoga, just taking a moment, being out in nature, going for a walk, taking a sip of water. There are a million and one things, and you will find the things that help you regulate the best. One of the tips I could give you outside of those regular things are ask questions and listen to learn. If you're in a situation with somebody and you're really trying to build that rapport with them or trust or build a relationship or anything like that, or even just create a stronger connection, normally asking open-ended questions and being curious is a really good thing. And all of us as human beings, we all want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be valued, we want to be respected. So if you can do that for others and you could listen to learn and be more understanding, that's actually going to help you with your own personal work. When we talked about the pause, there was the event, the emotion, and the response if you're at a low level of EQ. Then we talked about the event, the emotion, being aware, and then response time before response. When you could read before reacting, now you could stop reacting and start responding in a way that you feel you really want to respond. All of that said, there are times that we may need to yell at somebody, that we may need to burst out into tears and cry. There may be those times. The challenge is when we make those times the rule, not the exception. With the majority of the things that happen in any of our lives, we have the ability to regulate. Are we doing that? So those are some of the questions that we ask. There's a lot of people that ask me, Rob, is there a right way or a wrong way? There's really no right or wrong. It's more about getting it right and feeling good about yourself and feeling good about how you are with others than it is to be right. A lot of times when we focus on the arrogance of being right all the time, it has an effect on other people and the way other people are with us, which in turn has an effect on us. So I want you to keep that in mind. There's a lot of sayings around this, and I'll just put it to you in the way that it's coming to my mind tonight. When you put pressure on coal, it does one of two things. It either makes dust or it makes diamonds. The same thing happens with your EQ. The way you treat your EQ, it could diminish and erode things, or it could build things to be something very beautiful and very strong. Okay. If any of you in the room are readers or you listen to audiobooks, anything like that, this is one of the greater resources on for really understanding EQ. Now there are a ton more books. There's all kinds of podcasts. Travis Bradberry, who wrote this book, he has a lot of things that he puts on LinkedIn. So there are a lot of resources for EQ. I just happen to know through all of my experience in it that this book really puts it into the best perspective possible. So if you happen to be a reader or an audiobook listener, this is it. Also, on my website, if you go to my website, you can access my live reading list and see everything that I've read and pick per category if there's anything you would like. But I always like to share a nice resource. Now, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go through the Q&A in the chat and see if there's any questions. So if you do have a last minute question, get it in the Q&A and chat, and I'll make sure I read through it. If anybody has put in the Q&A or chat a comment or anything like that, I'm not going to read the comments out loud. The only thing I'm going to read are the questions so everybody could benefit from the responses. While I'm looking through the questions, here's my thank you to you for your attention this evening. If you scan this QR code, you could actually download and save an outline of tonight's program. So I'm going to leave that up on the screen for a moment while I look through the Q&A or the chat. Let's see. Okay, this wasn't a question, but it was a statement that I'll read because I could respond to it as well. Kelvin, thank you for joining us this evening. Glad to have you in the room. Calvin says, basically staying focused for a stance and more than just modeling in our own success. This is a very good statement, Calvin. That's exactly what it is. It's less about yourself and more about how can you build stronger connection and relationships with others. Very, very good. Thank you. Okay. All right. Kai. Kai, thank you for being in the room as always. You're in a lot of my programs. I always appreciate you attending. Tonight, Kai asks, is this a class based on accountability? If so, how can we apply this for authority figures, employers, casting directors, and our elders? Great question. So I'll address two parts. Is this a class based on accountability? The answer is yes. It's first based on self accountability. Are you accountable for yourself, which is self awareness and self regulation? Am I aware of my emotions? And am I regulating how those emotions come out of me? So that's the accountability for yourself. It's also accountability for the way you deal with others. Am I showing empathy with people? Am I recognizing the emotions in others? And am I using those skills to build stronger relationships with others? So the first part of it, is this a class based on accountability? Yes, it is. Great, great first part of the question. Second part, if so, how can we apply this for authority figures, employers, casting directors, and our elders? So, in other words, you're talking about maybe people of influence or people you're trying to gain influence with. We apply these exactly the same way universally. It's just going to be a little bit different depending on the situation. So if you're talking about authority figures or elders, you want to make sure that you're aware of your own emotions. You want to make sure that when those emotions come out of you, you're doing it in a respectful way. Also, are you aware of the emotions of the authority figures or elders? And are you showing understanding or empathy for them in those situations? So, the good news about the second part of your question, whether they're authority figures, employers, or elders, they're universally used the same. It just may be your approach, Kai, or the way you communicate them that would be different. Great question. Okay. Calvin has another question. Calvin asks, how do you feel like a king and feel understood? Well, feeling like a king, if you're referring to feeling powerful, feeling stronger, how do you feel like a king and feel understood? This is where your self-awareness and self-regulation come into play, but more so your social awareness. How do you deal with other people? If you're wanting to feel understood, are you understandable? Are you approaching people in a way to where they will actually show interest in you? So that's the answer to the first part. The second part Calvin asks is, how do you become a leader to become more conclusive in productivity and multiple dreams? How do you become a leader to become more conclusive in productivity and multiple dreams? I'm not quite sure what you're asking. However, if you're asking how you become a leader and be more productive in multiple dreams, get a better understanding of people and start recognizing the people that will help you get to where you go and invest more time in them. Okay, let's see if there's more. Okay, we have Ashley. Ashley, thank you for joining us this evening. Glad to have you here. Ashley asks, how do you make someone aware of their reactions if they don't realize what they do? How do you approach the topic? Ooh, Ashley, this is a really good question. So now you're recognizing in others that maybe they're not self-regulated or they're doing things they might not realize what they're doing or when they're doing it. You're asking how do you approach the topic? The way you approach the topic, Ashley, is you clearly, directly, and kindly ask them directly. You say, the way you said this made me or made the group feel this way. Are you aware or was that your intention to have that effect? So bringing it up to them in a calm, smooth, but direct way is the way to get people to understand the effect of their responses or their reactions. So you would just ask them very clearly, directly, and kindly, did you intend to hurt my feelings with that statement? Or what was your intention to yell at me? Or is there something else I need to know? So asking them directly, Ashley, is the best way to help them become more aware of what they're doing. Because what they're doing is the poor self-management piece. Only they would know if they're recognizing that. Now, if they do recognize it and their low level of emotional intelligence comes out anyway, that's on them. That's where they're going to lose a lot of relationships. However, if you bring it up to them, they may now become aware of it and say, "Oh, you know what? I didn't even think of it that way. Thank you for that information. I'll do my best to make an adjustment." And maybe you share with them the information that you learned tonight. So that's a really good question, Ashley. Thank you. Okay, let me see if there are any other questions. Okay. The next event through 9/9, that's on the 9th. It's called Components to Build Healthy Boundaries. That's next week on the 9th, and that will be 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you for that. Okay. Carrie asks, what's your website and contact info? I just put that up on the screen, no problem. Um, so all of my info is there. If you scan this QR code, this will take you to my bio site that you could go anywhere you want. You could go to my social channels, my website, anything like that. But that's all of my contact information. I'm going to do one last sweep for questions. Okay. It looks like that was it for the questions. I'm grateful to have been with all of you. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I certainly hope this was helpful. Get out there, start working on these skills. Join me for future programs, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.